Right then, guys, tonight's conversation, spells, spellcasting and magic. And really, when I was putting this together, I thought, let's just have talk a bit about magic in general, and then a bit about some thinking about what spells were in the olden days and a way to think about spells today. And then, depending on what I've already covered, if we haven't done things like sigil magic and rope magic and candle magic, we can do follow-up moots on those topics. So that's the thinking. And one of the things I found really interesting, if you start to look this up, you'll find magic being sold all over the place. Just a quick look on something called Fiverr. If you've ever been to Fiverr, Fiverr, it's a kind of website where you can buy various kinds of services. And if you look up magic on Fiverr, you will see hundreds and hundreds of magical services from, they will do a candle magic spell for you. They will make your love life better. They will even cast a beauty magic spell that you can see in the bottom corner there, where somebody's makeup has been removed, or the makeup applied. And the problem with talking about magic is that we often encounter what is best considered the superficial use of magic. So you say to anybody that you're a magician or a magician or an occultist, they will often pull up these kind of cheapy images of what magic is about, or they'll assume that you're a kind of textbook or film-based wizard, and both of those things, I think, misses the point. So what we'll talk about this evening is what I think magic is, and once we've finished my chat, then we can open up to a big discussion about what you feel that magic is for you. The first thing to say is whether we should use the magic with a K or magic with a C. Now, Aleister Crowley, who is a very well-known and oft-quoted occultist, started to spell magic with a K to differentiate it from the magic that conjurers and tricksters were performing. I find it fascinating that if you look at the history of occultism and you look at the history of performing magic, there was a revival, a renaissance in performing magic about the same time that there was a revival of conjuring, of real magic, if you like, spiritual magic. So around about the 1900s, you have a sudden appearance of all kinds of magic acts, some of them linked to the birth of spiritualism, because when the Fox sisters did their thing, it encouraged, shall we say, people who made no claims to be mediums, but were going on stage doing mediumistic acts and performing a kind of magic that we now know as mentalism. And the resurgence of that kind of magic, as at the same time as resurgence in occult or spiritual magic, there's a real kind of connection there. But Crowley wanted to make sure that magic wasn't linked to trickery, but magic with a K was linked to the esoteric arts or the occult. And he would also argue that magic with a K was a better spelling in terms of Kabbalah and what's called gematria, the way that numbers and letters are linked. But he defined magic as the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. This is a really important quote, because I think it's a quote that's often been misrepresented by people. People who want to diss occult and spiritual exploration that isn't within the Christian realms will often say that magic is about being willful. And I, having read Crowley several times and a number of his works, don't think that he was talking about will in the sense of being willful. It was talking about will in the sense of making choices and being willing to make choices. So that sentence, magic is the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will, for me, that's about taking willing action in the world around which we can create changes. And I think that's really important. And it's worth thinking about that definition. It's also worth thinking about the definition made by Dion Fortune, who another really important figure in early magic and occultism. And she said that magic is the art of changing consciousness according to will. Now think about that for a minute. Changing consciousness in according to will. We are surrounded every single day. We are bombarded by information coming into our world, our inner world, and we very rarely stop to consider where that information comes from and how we make sense of it. Modern neuroscience will tell you that we are actually creating representations of the outside world inside ourselves. And we allow that world sometimes to drive us and dictate to us. Whereas if we alter our awareness, shift our awareness, we can actually choose to make things appear different and feel different. So according to Dion Fortune, changing our consciousness in according to will means that we are willfully, and willfully, not willfully, with full will and attention, paying attention to the part of our world that we think needs some attention. We are shifting our consciousness. Now, both those definitions, I think, are really powerful definitions, and they're worth playing with in your own mind to try and get your head around what magic is. However, the word magic itself is a very problematic term. If we take the Western or sort of the European world out of the equation, we have other cultures, other civilizations across the world where magic is an active and vibrant part of their cultures. And we know that in certain African cultures, for example, that we have the magic is alive and is vibrant and is often given an edgy feel, sometimes quite a negative feel. So the magician is the purveyor of spells and curses. In other cultures, the Eastern Japanese cultures, for example, magic is vibrant there as well, only it's under the guise of other spiritual belief systems. So when we use the term magic, we've got to bear in mind that we're pulling in all kinds of stereotypes, all kinds of misunderstandings, all kinds of definitions. One of the ways I like to think about magic is that magic is the physical act of connecting with the nature of the universe and therefore allowing yourself to be part of the change processes within the universe and not a victim of those change processes. Now, many will want to start talking about whether the magic is black magic or white magic. Again, I have a problem with that, because for me, that's a Christian ideology that if you're doing magic, it's either going to be white magic, that is you're on the side of the angels, or black magic is you're on the side of the devils and the demons. And it doesn't work like that. All magic is grey, right? It's about the intention and the focus of the magic that gives it that spin. So I prefer the idea of grey magic. Now, an acquaintance I know, a guy called Oberon Zell Ravenheart, who you may or may not have heard of, he set up the Grey School of Wizardry. And the Grey School of Wizardry is it's semi-druidic, semi-mystical and magical. He was involved in all kinds of stuff in the early 60s and 70s. But he has this idea of magic that it's grey, and there are various shades of the grey and various types of magic. In fact, Terry Pratchett's book, The Colour of Magic, is in part inspired by some of Oberon Zell's work in relating the idea of different forms of magic in different colours, and grey magic being the working ground of the practicing magician. There's also another way of thinking about magic. There's what certainly places like the Golden Dawn would have called high magic and low magic. And that's not an elitist thing. It's just that the purpose of the magic is different. They would argue that most witchcraft or nature magic is low magic because it is dealing with the material world and interactions within it and around it. Now, those are important interactions. They're not low in terms of being not worth studying, whereas high magic is more related to the individual's development and self-awareness on a spiritual plane. So you will read various books that talk about, sort of herbalism and nature magic and weather magic and even divination as being low magic, whereas high magic is involved solely with the elevation of the individual's connection to the cosmos, to the universe. And they both work together in that sense. So if you're aware of so-called black magic, white magic, or grey magic, that's one thing. If you're aware of the idea of high magic and low magic, not as a derogatory sense, or but in a sense of that the focus is on different things. That's worth bearing in mind. Incidentally, I'll backtrack a bit on the grey magic. For those of you with a slightly science fiction bent to your film watching or television series, there's a fantastic television series that was a few years ago called Babylon 5. And Babylon 5 was about a space station on the edge of the peaceful universe. And all the races from the universe came together on Babylon 5, which was a very kind of vibrant place. But the spiritually enlightened people, or the race of spiritually enlightened people in that series, they called themselves members of the Grey Council. And the Grey Council was the Grey Council that actually could use magic and science together in order to educate and lead people. So if you're into that kind of stuff, have a look at Babylon 5. We can't talk much about magic without knowing what a spell is, or coming across the word spell. Now, really, a spell is about the idea of a number of words said with magical intent. And it is suggested that the correct pronunciation of the words are important. They go together with gestures, and those words and gestures will unleash a supernatural power. Any of you who have ever seen a children's magician will know that at some point the children's magician gets out their magic wand and says, "Hocus pocus," or some other simple word, and that causes the rabbit to appear in the hat or whatever they're doing. And that kind of pantomime notion of a spell exists, but that pantomime notion is drawn from a long history of spellcrafts that do have that kind of formula. In some societies and some practices, they believe that if you say the spells incorrectly, you do not intone the words correctly, that will not only negate the spell, but it could actually have its opposing consequences. So if you've ever been to the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic down in Boscastle in Cornwall, you may well, I don't know if they still got it on display, but there was at one time a recording of Aleister Crowley chanting some words of invocation. And when you listen to the way that he chants those words, it sounds really bizarre. But he would maintain he was chanting those words in that particular way because the words chanted in that way had the vibration in which they could cause the change that he was trying to make within himself or to the world it's outside. And if we just hold that thought for a moment, because we know that the idea of chanting and saying words in a particular pattern actually exists in a load of different cultures. Think of the Buddhist mantras, for example. They are vibratory tones that change state. And they're really important things to think about. So this is a universal idea that we can say some words in a particular way that have a particular meaning. So the spells are born. A really well-known spell is abracadabra. Abracadabra was usually a word that is written in a triangle, where the abracadabra is recycling and the words get less and less and less. And if you look at this diagram here, you can see how interesting that abracadabra triangle is. We have found this spell in Roman literature, in Roman history, and often this particular spell, the abracadabra spell, was written on a talisman given to malaria sufferers. And the word abracadabra was actually a spell, a healing spell in those times. Crowley comes along, of course, and decides that it shouldn't be spelled abracadabra, it should be spelled abrahadabra, which is really interesting. Crowley said that abracadabra was okay, but abrahadabra is more correct in terms of pronunciation and in terms of the number the word gets when you apply numerology to it. And those of you that saw the session we did on the Kabbalah, and we talked about gematria, so important. Now, this is a silver talisman that possibly is from the 6th or 7th century, with the words abracadabra in form of a Christian cross. And the thing that's noticeable here, by the way, is this kind of magic coexisted with Christianity, because Christian symbols are often found as part of the charms or the talismans that were used for magical purposes. The thing I love about this is abrahadabra, or abracadabra, may derive from the Hebrew phrase which means I will create as I speak, a spell, or the Aramaic, I create like the word. Now, those of you who are into your Bible will know that in the Gospels, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and God was the Word, and let it be. The importance of the spoken word in creating the world is written within the Christian Bible, and therefore it's kind of interesting that that concept of the word being the beginning of manifestation is really, for me, really interesting. And if you think about that a little bit, the thought becomes the word becomes the manifestation, which actually is how ancient spellcasters would have thought. Find the word, find the symbol, vibrate the word, and you manifest whatever it is you want to. Modern personal development workshop managers will call this an affirmation. Find the affirmation and you change your perception of the world. Going back to Dion Fortune, bringing about change of consciousness in accordance with the will. I suppose we need to talk a little bit about this thing called grimoires, and you've probably come across that word. Lots of horror movies have the ancient grimoires of Beelzebub or something. And grimoire is simply a phrase that means a spell book. It's usually a collection of magical ideas. In Wicca, you may well call it your Book of Shadows. And I've heard it called Book of Memories, Book of Manifestation by different practitioners. Really, it's your own personal collection of spells and the information that make the spells work. So when I started this journey years and years ago, we were encouraged not only to create our personal journeys, but at that stage, we were all copying from a Book of Shadows that belonged to the group. And that Book of Shadows had been copied by the leaders of that group when they were in their training. And so there was this copying of the text that became the kind of the work of the group, and the protection of that, and the idea that you're passing on the word of your tradition by handwriting the book that's on display in the temple, for want of a better phrase. Isn't it really interesting idea? And it's one that exists and has existed across cultures. So what I thought we'd have to do now is have a quick look at some of the grimoires before we get on to a kind of modern understanding of magic, and then we can have a conversation. I remember going to my local library when I first got interested in this stuff. And I think I mentioned before that I was quite young. I mean, I got my first tarot deck at 13 or something like that. Yeah, I know there's the number 13. And that led me to explore Arthur Waite's Pictorial Guide to the Tarot. That led me to look at texts on the Golden Dawn, all in my sort of early teens. The Golden Dawn led me into looking at well, a number of these grimoires that you can get. They're not, they're meant to be shrouded in secrecy, but a number of the first one I talk about, you can get. And the first one I started to read was The Key of Solomon. You can get this, you can probably download it as a PDF from loads of sources. I think there's Sacred Books online or something like that. I have an archive of this stuff, which is free to download this stuff. There are several versions of this Key of Solomon, and yes, the Solomon here is Solomon the king, supposedly. It existed originally in around about the sort of 14th, 15th centuries as a Latin or Italian text. But this is the time during the Renaissance period when people got interested in ancient forms of magic and occult or hidden philosophy. So we know from looking at, when we talked about the Kabbalah, lots of the resurgence of interest in the Kabbalah came from the same kind of time. If you really want to go and look at some of this stuff, you can look at the Bodleian Library and you can find an early Latin text from about 1600. But what the Key of Solomon is really a set of magic circles, magic sigils, magic spells that allow you to supposedly control aspects of nature. It's divided into two books. Book one is Invocations and Curses, and it says here, to summon and constrain spirits of the dead and demons in order to compel them to do the operator's will. It also describes how to find stone items, become invisible, gain favor and love, and so on. All low magic sort of stuff. But what's interesting here is the Book of Solomon may be quite old in terms of its ideas, but the way it is written has a strong Christian bias, i.e. the subjugation of demons, okay, and to summon and constrain spirits. Now, all those early ideas of necromancy come from this particular idea where you summon the dead to talk to them. We now call that mediumship, by the way, but that's another story. Book two actually talks about all the operations that you need to do to purify yourself and protect yourself against the demons you're going to be conjuring in the first book. And notice here in the books, the operator, the magician, is often called the exorcist, because the exorcist operates on the natural world and the world of spirit in order to subdue it and order it. I'm not convinced that that's the way to do it, but this is what they talk about. And the second book also talks about animal sacrifices and what the offerings that each spirit needs in order to bring it back into the realm of this reality. It's heavy going to read, but it's fun because there's some really cool diagrams you can look at and try and play with and work out how they got them. And if we haven't done the sigil magic, that we will do it, so I can show you how to draw some of these sigils for and of yourself. The other book, which was the second book that I obtained after I got the Key of Solomon, was The Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage. I love that title. The translation that I got was by Samuel L. Mathers, which was the Golden Dawn translations. But the book itself tells the story of an Egyptian mage named Abraham, or Abramelin, who teaches magic to a young Jew in Germany. And the young Jew presumed to have lived in the 1300s, 1400s. And what I love about this, notice the date, by the way. This book exists in 12 manuscripts with a date of around 1608, all about the same time. And of course, all of these works have been translated by people like MacGregor Mathers, of the Golden Dawn, because they formed a basis for the ritual magic of the Golden Dawn, which actually was a branch of Freemasonry, but that's another story completely. So, the sacred magic of Abramelin the Mage, and it focuses on the use of word squares or number squares because of the numerology. And the word set squares are actually kind of puzzles that if you solve the word square or the puzzle in the word square, you actually can get insight to the natural world or the spiritual world, and therefore you can control it. One of those famous puzzles is the Sator Arepo Tenant Opera Rotas, which I won't bother to translate for you, but you can look that up yourself. But what is really interesting is the way that square is structured. I said this once at a meeting, and I was taken to task by it, but I still hold by it. In some ways, these numbers and magic squares in the book of St. Abramelin are kind of like mantras, or they're kind of like these sort of word puzzles and mandalas that you see in other spiritual traditions. But if you've not seen that book, it's worth getting a copy of it. And as I say, you can probably find a free PDF copy of this and just amuse yourself. If I can find some PDF copies, I'll make sure they're put up onto the membership site so you can look at them there, because there are already loads of things like that on the membership site. The one that I didn't come across till much later when I was doing stuff was the false hierarchy of demons, Pseudomon Archaea Demonium. And again, from the 16th century, this is a book which talks about the demons that inspire us to do ill or bring ill upon us. And the names of the 69 demons in this book are really important, because the idea that when you name a thing, you can control a thing, which is why if you've ever seen any of the exorcist films or read any reports of modern day exorcism, you find that the priest spends a long time in trying to get the demon's name. Once you get the demon's name, the name gives you power. So this is more about demonology, but if you think about it, this upsurge of interest in occultism, which is just about things that are hidden, matched an upswing of fear within the Christian church about the idea of demons. And so demonology and occultism grew up together, and they've always been brought together. They're different things, because demonology is a Christian tradition. Well, not just, but sort of it's actually demons occur in other spiritual traditions, but from my perspective, it's about Christian demons. I was going to say something else about this that brought me into demons. Oh yes, there's a wonderful story by Amado Crowley, who claimed he was the son, albeit illegitimate son. In fact, all of Crowley's children are probably illegitimate, but Amado Crowley claimed to be Crowley's son. And in his book, he recounts a really interesting incident where he and Crowley are apparently walking along some cliffs somewhere. I believe it was somewhere in Cornwall, because, as you know, Crowley had a house down or stayed for a while in Cornwall, but it may not have been. And Amadeo was walking along, and they came across, I think it was a snail or a slug or something like that. And the child, Amado, was going to step on the snail. And Crowley, uncharacteristically apparently, as some would say, stopped him and said, "You mustn't do that, you can't do that until you name it." And Crowley apparently talked his son through this process of naming the snail. Now, I don't think the book says what name they called the snail, maybe it was Fred or something. But once the child had named the snail formally, or slug or whatever it was, Crowley said, now you know its name, you now have power over it. It's up to you what you do. And the child chose not to stand on Fred or whatever it was. And the lesson there was knowing the name of something in occult terms, the true name of something, actually bestows a certain degree of responsibility and power over that thing, which is why in lots of magic, the name or the true name of something is really an important concept. I'll leave you to think about that. And the last gematria thing I'll talk about, there's loads more, but is the Picatrix. The Picatrix is Arabian in origin. It talks about astrology and the occult and dates back to the 10th or the 11th century. And it's got a load of magical recipes, and some of the drawings in them are considered to be obscene or slightly rude. But the great thing about the Picatrix, it covers a whole range of spells with every conceivable wish or desire, and has been translated and has formed the basis of many, many spell books. The Picatrix was discovered and has now been, the manuscripts have been found and they're on display if I'm going to see them. It's a beautifully beautiful piece of work with loads of great images, and it contains 4 books. The first book is about the heavens and the effects of their causes using the images of the heavens. So that's basically astrology. Then it's on the figures of the heavens in general, the motion of the sphere and their effects on this world. Notice here the motion of the sphere and their effects on this world. You know, when I look at this, there's a wonderful forum called Quora, which actually people post questions. And if you ever want an evening of entertainment, just go onto Quora and look at some of the inane questions people are asking that show very little basic school knowledge, let alone anything else. And there's been a lot on there recently about the flat Earth, as people who believe the Earth is flat. And of course, you know, that's not an ancient phenomena, all right? It may have been initially during our primitive times, but we do know that early cultures knew about stars going around and orbits going around, and they didn't necessarily think of the Earth as being flat, which I think is interesting. So book 3 is about the properties of the planets and signs, their colors, and how you can speak to the spirits of the planets. The spirits of the planets, I am reminded of some workshops I attended, not because I was interested, but because I was more amazed that somebody was doing a workshop on them, about the kind of the physical spirits that exist in the various planets of the solar system. So this particular person was insisting that the spirit of dolphin lived on Mercury. And that had a problem for me, just the scientist in me going, what? I'd happy to go with the kind of metaphor there if I could find any sense in the metaphor. But here they're talking about the spirits of the planets. And then book 5 is about the spirits themselves. And if you can get a hold of a copy, you won't get a copy of this book, by the way, I don't think it's been reproduced yet. It will be maybe, but you can certainly get some of the pages from it to look at. It is a lovely book. So those are the grimoire. They're ancient grimoire, and I think if we look at the Key of Solomon, Abramelin the Mage, the Picatrix, and particularly, you'll find all of the roots of what we now see in modern books of spells and witchcraft and all those other things. And they've been distilled and sometimes, I think, overly simplified to make them more palatable for a modern audience, but I think they miss a lot in translation. So let's come on to spell casting, which again is the operation of using magic. It's basically about raising and directing energy. Now, we could talk forever about energy. If I mention energy in New Age circles, they want to take it into various different areas that we don't necessarily need to. There's healing energy, there's light energy. And when I think about energy, I just think about that in the scientific phrase of the ability to do work, but also the energetic nature of us as beings. See, energy exists as a scientific thing, i.e., the ability to do work, and as a metaphor, as our energy and zest for life. And I think energy really is about this. Spellcasting for me would be the art of raising your enthusiasm, your energy in terms of degree of activity to change the things around you. So I was trying to think together what if I was, well, as we did with the school when we were running courses, face-to-face courses, we were talking about to people about how to think about spells and magic these days. We came up with this kind of diagram. All practical magic begins with an intention. That is the desire, the idea of what it is you're trying to achieve. It's followed by a visualization, which is the idea that you're seeing that thing happening, which is linked to this thing called correspondences. Now, correspondences are where the idea is one thing can mean or substitute for another thing. I'll talk about it in more detail in a moment. That forces you to bring action, which turns into an affirmation, which results in a behavior which mirrors the intention, which takes you back around. I think magic is an active process, and I could use this to talk about psychologically people doing better for themselves, because it doesn't require any belief in magic to make this circle work in lots of different formats. But I think the practical magic is what this comes down to. So if we look at it at the moment, intention really is about why are you doing what you're doing? What do you hope to get out of it? I believe, and I'm getting very personal here, but I believe we see chaos in the world because of the mixed intentions of the people acting upon and within the world. Okay. And it's about, if you're doing a thing, the way you do it with the mindset behind it will always create an outcome or will define the outcome. Really important idea. So when people want to cast some magic, the first question is, what's the intention behind it? Is there an intention behind it? Or are you just playing with it? If there's an intention there, then that motivates everything else. Okay. The next stage is visualization. You see, as this quote says, visualize the thing as it's happening. The book by Rhonda Byrne, The Secret, nicked a lot of this and put it out of context. It would simply meant by have the intention to earn lots of money, visualize lots of money, and the universe will provide it. No. There's other things that have to happen first. All right. But visualization is really important. When you see a thing happening, you're changing your consciousness to be aware that that thing can happen. Okay. The idea of correspondences. Now, this is the bit that I find fascinating. All of those various books we've talked about and those various grimoires, and going way, way back, talk about correspondences. And this links to the idea that we can have one thing represent another thing. For example, if I said to you, you're red with rage, then red can be associated with rage or anger. So something, when you're using the color red, could link to energy or anger or rage. Now, the important thing about these correspondences is that I think that you have to connect to and create your own. But as a starting point, there are some here. Each day of the week, all right, as you know, is named after a planet. Moon is Monday, Mars is Tuesday, and so on. And if you think about the moon, what's the moon do? Well, the moon is about dreams or the unconscious or whatever. So any spells to do with dreams or the unconscious, you do them on a Monday. Simple. And you look at the color connections between, whites and grays, and the deities, Luna, Diana, and Artemis. There's a formula there of creating a moon day spell, um, if you chose to do so. If we look at Mercury Wednesday, if I'm going to write a book, I could choose to create a spell that involves the air and the color yellow and images of Mercury and Hermes, and perform that spell on Wednesday. I won't go into this now, but you can look it up. Certain times of the day are also assigned to different of these things. So midnight on Wednesday, i.e. the first part of it, is actually true Wednesday, as is midday, but the other hours relate to slightly different things. But this is about creating a link between your intention and the physical reality around you and your imagination. Here's another one. White, really, white, colors, really important in candle magic, particularly. But if I wanted to suddenly, or I don't know, think about ambition and energy, I might start to wear orange, create an orange robe to do my spelling or whatever. These are really important, and they're all part and parcel of this creation of a set of things around you that remind you of what it is you're trying to do. That's the key, by the way. It's not what the book says, it's what they remind you of doing. White candles for purity, perhaps, full moon. Yellow candles for confidence and joy and creativity. Green for nature and healing. If these colors relate to you, then you use that color in whatever spell you cast. So now you've got, your intent, you've got to see the thing happening. You then start to build a set of references around you that all relate to the same thing, that connect psychologically, emotionally, and I would argue spiritually to your intention. And then, of course, you take action. Now, my problem with books like The Secret is they suggest that by saying the right words, having the right visualization, having a vision board, and actually saying the affirmation, I am rich and wealthy and healthy, is all you need to do. No, you don't. You need to do something, and that's where the action comes in. So we've now had intention, we've had the visualization, we've had the correspondences. That takes work, all right? The creation of your correspondences creates work in order to bring about action. I was, a number of years ago when I first started this stuff, I may have told this story before, but I'll tell it again. I was sitting in a discussion group about, in this case it was Wicca, about witchcraft and the power of magic. And it was quite an interesting group. It was the group that we all went to before you went on to the initiation or whatever it was. And in this group, which was led by an interesting character, somebody said, is it possible for me to cast a spell to get me a job that pays money, good money? Now, fair enough, he wasn't saying to create a spell that brings me money, but create a spell that gets me a job. So at least he was willing to take some kind of action. And the lecturer, the teacher at the time, went through all of the kind of associations for money and wealth, suggested that he makes a correspondence to coins in a tray on his altar, all this, that, and the other. And after about 10 minutes of exploring all these things they could use as symbols of becoming wealthy and getting a job, the guy that asked the question said, well, will all that work? And he said, yes, but it takes a lot of effort. He said, I would suggest you go home, write a CV, tidy yourself up, and go and apply for a job. Because this magic doesn't happen in a vacuum unless you take action towards the goal. Does that make sense? And then the affirmation is a restatement of the visualization. You are reminding yourself that you may not think you're worthy of that job, but you've done all those bits of work on yourself and reflection on yourself. So now you can start to challenge all of the doubts that you have. And of course, that then leads to you to behave as if. Yeah. Behaving as if is a really important thing. Most of us have the intention to do something, but we don't behave as if we are going to get it. We become apologetic about the thing that we want. There's in hypnotherapy, there is a wonderful induction. That is where you induce a trance with somebody that actually a lot of stage magicians, stage hypnotists use, but also some hypnotherapists use. And it really works. It's called the let's pretend frame. And the idea is that you ask somebody, in a moment we're going to do the work, I want you to pretend that you're hypnotized. If the person starts to pretend that they're hypnotized, they're giving you all the body language signals and cues that they would expect to be hypnotized, and all you need to do is build those up and amplify them for them. And so the pretend behavior becomes the real behavior. Or put another way, fake it till you make it is a phrase I've often heard, which I've never really liked, but I get what's going on here. If you start to act in a certain way, your consciousness changes, but the way you are perceived by the universe changes. And by the universe, I mean everybody else around you. Yeah. And the key principle, and I'm going to stop just now, but the key principle that we're working with here is often stated as above, so below. There's a lot in this idea, but basically, I first learned it as whatever happens in the universe affects me, and whatever I do affects the universe. And I believe that fundamentally to be true because we are connected. And that phrase came initially from the Emerald Tablet, which is about 2,000 years old. And I know we've done a session on the Kabbalion, which is this. And I think that idea of making the connection that we're part of a whole, not individuals outside of a whole, frames magic in a really interesting way. And if you looked at the tarot cards, you know your tarot cards from the deck, well, often called the Rider-Waite deck, but we know it's not Rider-Waite driven. We often see the magician is pointing up and pointing down, as above, so below, and magician robed, ready with all their tools on the table, all their associations, ready to perform and act upon and within the world. And lastly, a chunk of this could be called hermetic knowledge or hermeticism. And there are three aspects to hermeticism that actually make it work. One is understanding what we could call alchemy, the fact that natural transformations mimic spiritual transformations. Then it's astrology, about the way the celestial bodies influence but do not dictate actions. I arrogantly think that most modern astrologies miss the point, because your horoscope isn't about predicting the future as much as it is about seeing the ebb and flow of the as above, so below within you. And lastly, theurgy, which is actually the magic that brings about divine consciousness, the connect to divine consciousness. That, for me, is the magician's path. And on the way, we get sidetracked into all kinds of wonderful things like casting spells and playing with the idea that we are manifesting. And that is it. I'll stop there and we can start to talk.